Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Damo Shanta Golba wash process Ethiopia from Hatch Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Hatch, based out of Markham, Ontario, and this coffee right here was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video as part of a viewer subscriber recommendation suggestion series where I finished first place out of 6 coffees on that day. And Hatch was a suggestion to us by Ramana Raja, and Howard has actually been talking them up for a number of years. So shout out to and thank you to Ramana and Howard for the suggestion. This coffee right here is actually an introductory to Hatch coffee for me, as I'd never had anything from them before. And the entire purpose of this coffee was to kind of get an idea of how their standard offerings worked, as I have an eye on getting one of their higher end offerings. That's specifically what Ramana requested. So hopefully in the near future I'll get an opportunity to purchase one of those, but their higher end offerings sell out pretty quick as they're a pretty popular coffee roaster. So this will be great to kind of get an idea of how their coffees are. This right here is day 48 of this coffee. And Hatch has several different recipes on their websites. This is the one I kind of settled on, which was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 94 degrees Celsius, which is about 201 degrees Fahrenheit, through the V60, so with a slightly more fine grind. And they are a Canadian light for the roast profile. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. So day 32, which was that blind taste test rankings day, and the reason it finished first place was because it definitely had a slight bit of this peachiness to it, and there was an ever so slight savoriness, so most closely aligned with maybe some black peach tea. And there were some other things as well, just basically a pretty soft cup of coffee. The peachiness was in the finish, and a fair bit of sweetness, resulting in a pretty positive first impression. Day 35 ran it through the Chemex, and there was nothing too overly pronounced through the Chemex, and this is why I went away from the Chemex with this coffee. After a couple of days, a couple of times trying with the Chemex, I wasn't able to necessarily get the best out of this coffee. Felt a little muted and tame overall. Reminded me of a slight bit of some peach jam with a lighter honey. There's a semi-sweet citrus in the cup as well as the third most prominent characteristic. Decent cup, not spectacular. So we went back to the V60 and was seeing overall improvements in the cup. Semi-sweet, but nothing too overly pronounced. We'll look to get more sweetness as well as stone fruit from the cup, because the stone fruit is there, it's in the finish, it's slight, it's not the most pronounced thing, and the sweetness the entire time drinking this coffee still remained just sort of moderate, as opposed to what I was hoping for was a lot more sweetness that you can get from a lot of washed Ethiopias. Leaning slightly more citric on this day, we continue. Day 41, back through the V60, and the coffee was definitely lending itself to some floral honey in abundance, and this is the biggest theme of this coffee. This was by far the most pronounced characteristic, was this pretty strong floral honey. What they have listed, orange blossom and honey, I think are 2 flavor notes that they have listed on here, so pretty heavy on the florals. This coffee was pretty heavy on the florals overall. Persists with a pretty clean yet tame base with that slight bit of the peachy finish. Still decent. Day 43, again, a really honey-like cup of coffee on this day, and as I'm drinking it now, it's definitely still got that really strong floral honey, heavy on the florals. Just from the entire time drinking this cup of coffee, it's definitely present in the finish, by far the most pronounced characteristic in the finish. Secondary factors including a slight bit of nuttiness and some slight sweet citric rind. So, okay. Day 44 ran it through the AeroPress, and in this sense, the coffee has a kind of light cookie-like sweetness, which was a little bit enjoyable as the most defining characteristic. And then again, there was that ever-present floral honey, definitely present in this cup of coffee. Pretty light in general, but it was decent to the AeroPress. Just liked it a little more through the V60. And day 46, which was the final day, and it was through the V60 one more time. Like this coffee better at the moderately lower temperatures, and it's kind of funny because 94 degrees Celsius was the lowest temperature that any of their recipes had. They go even lower with the other ones, so it's kind of funny as a lot of people like to brew these coffees a lot hotter, and I tried that. I actually do like the way that it comes out in lower temperatures a little bit more, so keep that in mind, but was still having a tricky time getting the abundance of sweetness that I was hoping for was in this cup of coffee. But if I'm being completely honest, I just don't think it was there. I think this is a little bit more moderate of a cup of coffee. Slight and delicate. Still pretty consistent in that sense. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And 5 level 4s, so let's run through them real quick, starting with the cleanliness. And the cleanliness could be actually on the higher side of the level 4. If I was being really generous, I could bump that up to a level 5, but it is one of the better characteristics of this cup of coffee. The finish at level 4, as I'm drinking this, it actually does have a surprisingly long and lasting finish, so that's definitely justified there. The citrus fruit became the most dominant fruit characteristic in this cup of coffee for me, so that's why it's at the level 4, and the stone fruit was definitely the secondary fruit characteristic, so that's a little lower at the level 3. Acidity and florals, they're pretty high on here. The acidity is definitely justified at the level 4, but the floral is probably still the most pronounced thing. I really like it at that 4 mark, so if that's at the 4 mark, then probably consider the citrus fruit at the lower side of that 4. But very pronounced florals throughout the time drinking this cup of coffee. The savoriness that we had mentioned earlier, it was ever so slight, so this kind of peach black tea that I was getting wasn't by far pronounced in any sense, so that's why it's still moderately low at that level 2. And the body at level 2, this is still a pretty light bodied cup of coffee, even run through the B60. But the one thing we must discuss, and the biggest thing about this coffee, is that the sweetness is at a level 3. And I've always said that a kind of prerequisite for me absolutely loving a cup of coffee is that we have to have a level 4 minimum for the sweetness, and this wasn't the sweetest cup of coffee out there, so that, I'll be completely honest, was a little disappointing. I was hoping for more out of this coffee in that sense, but level 3 is definitely justified right there. I don't think I could bump that up, or it definitely doesn't deserve to be bumped down, so 3 looks about perfect for me, and as a result, quite like the way that this tasting wheel looks. Alright, overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I've said many times that I don't particularly love reviewing washed Ethiopian coffees because they're basically, high floor, low ceiling coffees. Like, I've had a million washed Ethiopias in my life. We've all had a million washed Ethiopias in our lives. And unless it's something that's so unique, different, out there, drastic, or just thoroughly impressive beyond all comprehension, then you're going to come away from it saying, okay, this was washed Ethiopian coffee. And that's kind of the impression that I took away from this coffee. And I think I was kind of a victim of having to carry the torch for all the other 6 coffees that were on that table, because by the end, this one was probably still the best of those 6 coffees. And it was the best because it just kind of remained very traditional in the sense that it's light, floral, clean Ethiopian coffee. So nothing that wowed me by this coffee, but at the same time, they did a very good job of just kind of maintaining true to the extensive traditionality that you can experience from washed Ethiopian coffees. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. I think if you really like those floral honeys, this coffee reminded me of so many of Calendar's coffees, which I always describe as really, really floral honey cups of coffee. And even then, some Fried Hats coffees remind me a lot of dark honey. So there are a lot of coffee roasters that when they roast this way can have this really strong honey-like taste to them. So keep that in mind. It's a pretty clean cup of coffee, so anybody that, likes avoiding that funkiness that comes from the cup of coffee, this is pretty decent. It still has some nice fruit to it, most notably that citrus, and if you can find a way to get more of that peachiness throughout the finish, then I think that this would set it over the top. If you can get that peachiness to a 4 and you can get that sweetness to a 4, then I think we have something really, really nice on our hands right here. But for the most part, I think this is the way I will leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything from Hatch, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Damo Shanta Golba, wash processed Ethiopia from Hatch Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.